All right, Rick, these are unbelievably important topics, but I do see that we have our special guest in the queue, and I don't want to keep him waiting any longer. Without further ado, welcome to the program, Saginaw County Sheriff William L. Federspiel. Welcome to the program, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Let me tell you, first of all, my name is Michael Camorn. In the studio with me are some activists and other people involved with speaking positively about marijuana, cannabis reform, and medical cannabis. And I want to tell you personally, even though I'm a criminal defense lawyer, I have a tremendous amount of respect for the law enforcement community. And I know personally I could never do what you guys do, and I do have a lot of respect for you. And I wonder, and I know you've probably been doing it for a long time, and I know you're now in an elected position, but I'm curious, with the career in law enforcement, do you still enjoy the practice of policing and, being a sheriff or whatnot?
Oh, yeah. I'm in my 27th year in law enforcement. Spent 9 years in Florida and the rest of my time back here in Michigan where I grew up, and I do enjoy it. It is quite challenging at times, and being the sheriff of Saginaw County, an elected position, I've grown to appreciate working directly for the people as opposed to working in a bureaucracy. So being a constitutional officer, I look at things a lot differently today than I did when I first became a police officer many years ago.
I mean, do you find it in the position you're in now, that politics are have an influence on the decision making? I would assume that there's no way to avoid it, but do you sense it in some of the ways in which you have had to lead in your position?
Oh, yes, absolutely. As a politician, obviously I work for the people of Saginaw County. There are 200,000 people. Being a sheriff, it's not like being in the legislative branch of government where politics definitely plays a larger role, I believe, because there are so many partisan politics at play in the legislative branch. As a sheriff, there's not as many partisan politics, even though we do have to run as partisan position, because we must follow the law, which is dictated by the legislative branch. So the politics aren't as bad, in my estimation, as a sheriff, for my branch of government as opposed to the legislative branch.
Okay. Let me ask you this. 27 years in the police force, and, I've been practicing law 21 years, and I remember it was like when I first started. How would you reflect back? How do you think the state of the law is now, or what would you say is most different about it than when you first began? I'm just curious from, a historical perspective and the experiences that you've had.
Well, it's changed quite a bit. We are a litigious society these days. Most of what law enforcement officers must do, the way we enforce the law, are dictated now based on lawsuits that have occurred over the last 30 years, let's just say. I distinctly remember the days in Florida when I was a police officer in 1987 when open container of alcohol was okay, as long as you weren't driving the car. As we know today, those rules have been tightened up. The discretion given to officers when it comes to certain types of offenses have been pretty much stripped away. And again, that's based on the litigation that has occurred over the last 3 decades. So that's the biggest change.
In other words, you're saying a lot of the direction of law enforcement has been guided by liabilities and protecting against liabilities for policing, essentially. And it has an impact on the way that you go about your business, so to speak.
Oh, it absolutely does, yeah. And that's exactly what I'm saying. It really has made a difference in the way police officers do their jobs. I distinctly remember a case of an officer who gave a ride to someone who was suspected of driving drunk back in 1988 and took the person home, and the person was dropped off, left his car on the side of the road. The officer was doing him a favor, I guess you could say. At least that's the way he saw it. But when the man got home, he got into an argument with his wife. There was a second vehicle in the driveway. He left. He got into an accident, hurt someone. And that person was the first one to say, well, gee, the officer had me under arrest. he should have done his job and kept me in jail the first time, and I wouldn't have done this. And that's from that day forward, I saw law enforcement change dramatically, and what officers, how they did their jobs changed dramatically from that day forward. That was 1988.
Fascinating. All right, let's move on to some of the marijuana questions and some of the policy changes. People are excited to ask some questions. I want to ask you first, do you think, I mean, from a sheriff's perspective, would you consider yourself a states' rights enforcer or a federal, what is the influence in your world of states' rights versus federal law enforcement? In other words, where does the 10th Amendment stand for you as a upholder of the law in policing when you've got this dichotomy of these two, intertwined and sometimes government agencies?
Oh, yeah. No, it's real easy. I'm a state enforcer. My job description is written into the Michigan Constitution. I'm a constitutional officer of the state of Michigan. So for me, it's really cut and dried. I'm a state constitution officer, and I respond directly to the people at a state level, not federal.
And correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm not sure if it was the National Sheriff's Association. I know that they've taken the position, or it's been represented that they're the last line of defense, essentially, in the event of a federal government, takeover or whatever. But if there was those that felt as if the federal government was encroaching on rights that, like taking guns or what have you, would be the sheriffs, the sheriffs of the state, counties that would be the expected, or that they've assigned themselves that position and expect to be in that position should something like that happen. Am I correct in that? Just,
yes.
In principle?
Yes, you are, and I agree with that as well. I work for the people of Saginaw County, and that's who I'll protect.
Okay, so when the federal government comes in to raid a dispensary, no, I'm just kidding. So let's talk about some of the reform stuff now. Saginaw, of course, this is the city of Saginaw. City of Saginaw's going. I don't know if they have the number of votes yet. No, but they're moving to get onto the ballot decriminalization.
They're circulating petitions.
Okay, so let's assume that it happens. It's been happening in the other communities. Do you have a prediction on whether or not they're going to be able to get them onto the ballot? Do you think there's enough interest in Saginaw that would, get enough signatures?
Yeah, I think there is. I'm not much of an opinionated guy. Well, actually, I am, but I jest. I think there is enough interest, and I think it may get on the ballot. And I've preached a lot to kids in college. I talk to them all the time about getting involved in politics, and if they want to make something happen, that's how they have to do it. And this group that is circulating the petitions, I give them all the credit in the world. Whether people agree with their message or not, they are taking this fight of theirs to the people the right way, and I applaud them for their efforts.
Engage in the process. It's a good message. I agree, and you're right. More people should, and you can't complain unless you're participating. Let me ask you this. Put aside the law for a second. I don't want to ask any, but do you believe that marijuana is properly scheduled as a Schedule 1, that it's actually more dangerous or as dangerous as heroin or LSD or do you, I know you've seen it all, I'm sure you've, encountered, the absolute worst along the lines, but do you think that marijuana is inherently dangerous on its own? I'm not talking about acquiring it in an area where there's drug dealing and other drugs that are involved. I'm saying just in and of itself, the possession of the use of it, do you see it as dangerous as it's been scheduled?
Well, no, I don't. And I wouldn't advocate for young people to use any type of a schedule, whether Schedule 1 or any other type of drug without, advice from a doctor. Obviously, they're still growing, but if we're talking adult usage, I don't see it as being as dangerous as any of the other drugs out there when you refer to heroin or crack or cocaine in all of the years that I've done this. And there is a prohibition right now against marijuana, and I think back in our history to the prohibition on alcohol. When there's supply or demand, there will be supply, and that's what we ran into back in the 20s and 30s, the last century when we dealt with alcohol, and we're dealing with that now with marijuana. So this is a debate. I'm really curious to see how things are going to progress in Colorado, Washington State, some of the other states, because it's dialogue that's needed to be brought to the forefront. I'm glad that it is being brought to the forefront, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the people want and how they want their laws to reflect what they want.
So if I'm understanding, like you actually, I mean, in theory, philosophically, support Colorado's, I mean, not support it, but you believe that they have a right to do what they're doing independent of federal interference. Like when Eric Holder, gives a statement of some wishy-washiness of these, and I get what he's saying, I'm just saying, but like, it's totally subjective on a lot of those points. I mean, that's not, you're not satisfied with that, are you? Or
no,
like they're talking about raiding Washington State now because they don't have the same, level of regulations Colorado does, and there's a family out in, the west side, I think, of Washington that's
Kettle Falls,
which they're, the five family members. I don't know. Does that bother you? I mean, do you fallen on that side of things?
Well, yeah, I'm a states' rights guy. I don't think the federal government should be involved with that. Federal government should defend our national securities, obviously. The feds have things that they need to do with the federal government. We have a federal government, but we also have states, and states have rights. We really need to look at the definition of those. And when we're going to the polls for our presidential selections and for Congress and the United States Senate, we really need to be asking the questions of the people that represent us in Washington, how they feel about states' rights as opposed to federal rights. And that's obviously something a lot of people don't ask, or they don't make themselves aware of when they go to the voting booth. That's one of the things that I always ask. And I'm not a big fan of federal nanny states in that respect. So the states should be able to check themselves, if you will. That's what the people want. I'm not a really big fan of the federal government stepping in and dictating to states what they need to do.
All right, returning to the local issue now. Assuming that and there's been many other states that have, conducted similar, political, effectiveness and passed goal decriminalization or legalization, and obviously the message is not that this overrides state law. I don't think anyone is I would not, as a lawyer, I can't say that to someone in good conscience in terms of advice. But the principle here is that there is a voice of a specific community that is, decreed in some capacity that this is how they would like, through the democratic process, this is how they want this issue to be addressed. If that happens in Saginaw, you're the county sheriff, and you don't. I mean, you patrol the city of Saginaw, and you can make arrests. Mm-hmm. Your officers can make arrests there.
Right.
And I would imagine that sometimes Saginaw office. I don't know. Do they ever let the city attorneys or are all their arrests prosecuted through the state, or do they have some discretion of some kind?
Oh, they have. The interesting thing, and I tell people this all the time, is how things are set up with local law enforcement. The City of Saginaw Police Department, they can write for infractions under city ordinance. They can write under state law, but a lot of times they write under city ordinance. The sheriff's office, my sheriff's office, and most sheriff's offices don't have local ordinances to write, so we have to follow state law. However, if the city of Saginaw and the city council asks me, if they take a vote and say, well, we want the sheriff to come in here and patrol, and we want him to write under city ordinance, now we would. That would give me an option then to follow what the people of the city of Saginaw want, and we would. And I've said that before. You've got to give us the authority to do that if we're able, because you've got the state police, you've got the sheriff, you've got the local city police. And so the city police, it's a no-brainer for them. They can follow it easily. It's their ordinance. But for a county agency or for the state police, that's another matter. There are a lot of state police officers assigned to the city of Saginaw right now. I don't know that they would even consider following a local ordinance, or even if they could, I'm not sure what their organization would do. My organization could, if the city fathers would ask us to do that or take a vote to do that. There's a little bit of a way to do that, because they asked me to come in and do some traffic patrols when their force was minimized a little bit last year, and I said, well, I need you to take a vote of city council. So with certain factors of it being done, we could follow that ordinance. Again, I work for the people. If the 50,000 residents in my county that live in the city of Saginaw vote for this, I'll respect it.
Well, I mean, I wasn't sure. Is the authorization for you and your department to follow this would come from something more than a ballot initiative that would pass? You're saying that in addition to that, it would have to be the city council that would say, hey, we want you to, or when you come in there, sheriff, with your officers, we'd like you to follow. It would be something else on top of that? Or yeah,
I mean, it would be nice. I don't need it. I don't need that. It would be nice to have that, but sure. I don't need it. Yeah, I mean, I could just tell my deputy. You
do agree that the situation is what will dictate. In other words, your officers under that circumstance, your sheriffs could exercise a discretion and write a ticket. I mean, they can and are given that authority in other instances. I mean, I could see situations where he has like a first offense or domestic, and I don't know, maybe you have certain policies that some get charged under state ordinance or whatnot. But there's a lot of other, circumstances that it just depends on whether it's a sheriff, local police, or state police that drives the who the prosecutor is going to be, essentially, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty much what it is.
And but because it's the county, you do with other circumstances allow for a certain exercise of discretion for your officers. I mean, if someone writes a ticket under city ordinance, they haven't done anything wrong against policy, and they've been authorized to be able to make that decision in the moment, or there's a policy of some kind that they can make a decision.
Discretion, civil infractions, traffic tickets or things like that, they get discretion whether they write a ticket or not. With misdemeanor arrests, felony arrests, their discretionary policy kind of goes by the wayside there. We don't like them taking discretion on who they think they should arrest if there's been a law violated. So there's a little bit of a gray area there, but overall, my deputies do have discretion when they deal with the law. And again, we work for the people, so for us as a sheriff's office, it's a little different.
So some other people want to ask some questions. I could keep going, and I'm really enjoying talking to you. But you're talking about misdemeanors. Misdemeanors, unequivocally, if there's going to be a misdemeanor charge, whether it be a written ticket or an arrest associated with a misdemeanor crime, it's going to be under state law. That's generally what happens, which I think I'm hearing. Okay.
Exactly.
But you're not and you would probably enforce the same policy. In other words, if this did pass, it would be difficult, absent a directive or a request from the city council, to have you, request that you not do that and to follow the, Do you know how the city council's been on medical marijuana in terms of or decriminalization?
No, I don't actually. I used to be on city council. I spent 3 years there, and it's actually interesting. I did want to make a point that in 2008, 2 weeks before I was elected sheriff the first time, I was asked by a group in a public forum if I supported the medical marijuana ballot initiative, which was on the same ballot in November of 2008 that I was on, and I said, yes, I did support it. And I remember people saying, oh, my God, you did that before you got elected sheriff. What are you, crazy? But I did support it, and a lot of people don't know that. I supported that, and I still do, but I want to make sure people understand, too, that we just have to know what the law is so that we can then follow it, because it's important that we follow. We can't just have, say, well, it's passed, but then we stretch. So we just have to be careful with that. And the same thing with this ballot proposal. We just have to know what the language is and then follow it, and it'll be okay.
Rick, you want to ask a couple questions?
Yeah, Sheriff, this is Rick Thompson. We were involved in an online chat the other day sponsored by the Saginaw News, and I'd like to thank you for your participation in that. You and Police Chief Leip were also involved in that. At the end of that, Carrie Justice, who's a friend of this program and who happened to tell me that she was in the Saginaw News studio with you during that presentation, said that you offered to perhaps work with the medical marijuana community to formulate some different rules, or perhaps to advance a legislation or work on some kind of guidance for the county. Could you tell us a little bit more about what you might envision there?
Well, I mentioned to Carrie, and it was good talking to you online, by the way. I appreciate that.
Very much. It was a lively debate, and there were a lot of participants online, too.
It was. I couldn't keep up. I can type fast, but not that fast. But
it was
when I was sitting next to Carrie, she had mentioned to me about she asked me, would I be interested in being on a panel maybe to take a look at future legislation or language? And I said, of course, I would be happy to. Because one of the things we run into, we have laws right now with alcohol. And I mentioned the Florida law where when I was a police officer down there, it was legal to have open container as long as you weren't driving. But obviously we know that's changed. You can't have an open container of alcohol in the vehicle while it's moving. And so pretty much everyone knows that, but there aren't a lot of people, I find, who are aware that there's certain ways to transport usable marijuana. If you are a medical marijuana patient, you must transport it a certain way, much like the law says you have to transport alcohol. So I would like to educate people. I want people who have the right to carry usable marijuana with them to do it in a legal way. And so there has to be some form of education out there, and I do feel that's my responsibility to a great extent. There are a lot of people in my community who are medical marijuana patients, and I want to make sure that they get from point A to point B safely, and they do it within the confines of the law. And, again, that is part of what I envision is just being more of an educator. If I can offer some guidance, I'd be happy to. I'm not enough by any means. However, I would be happy to offer whatever expertise that I may have that would help the cause of them.
Let me ask you a question. I just want to follow up on this. This is an interesting point, and I know that, this transport law, there's a good legal argument about it conflicting with the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act. In other words, Section 4, an individual is supposed to be immune from prosecution, arrest, or any penalty if they conform with Section 4. And nothing in that discusses how one is supposed to transport. This is a, subsequent, legislative enacted law in a different law. So, I mean, there's a legal, you would have to debate, which one will prevail. But putting that aside, that is the law, do you see that as a real concern? I mean, do you have a problem with people having it? I mean, assuming that they're not smoking it, of course, in the vehicle. But do you think there's is that something that raises real public safety issues?
No, I don't see it raising a real big public safety issue. But I don't want to see, like I said before, we have 16 police agencies in Saginaw County, besides the Saginaw County Sheriff's Office. So you may travel throughout Saginaw County and encounter many different township police officers, city police officers, or the state police. I think it's good that people understand all of the laws because I am just one agency. So even if I instructed my deputies, this is what we're going to do, there are other agencies out there that have different viewpoints, and I'm not naive to that fact. So until we can get language cleaned up, and I think that's where I was going with Kerry, is getting some language cleaned up at the legislative branch of government down in Lansing to make sure that we're all on the same page and we look at it all the same way, because no, I don't look at that as a public safety issue when someone is in possession of it. However, I do get put into a bit of a position if I'm confronted with that and someone says, well, isn't that against the law, and didn't so-and-so get a ticket for transporting alcohol when the top was open and if they were driving, drinking or holding it down the road even if they weren't drinking it. So those are issues that I find myself as a sheriff having to take a look at. I just want to make sure people are aware of it, that it may not be us, it may be another agency, or even if it is us, it could put us in a little bit of a box. We just want to make sure people are aware of what the law is. We want people to get where they're going safely and obviously without any hassle.
I had a conversation today in a pretrial conference room with a detective from a drug enforcement team in Macomb County, and I think you even hit on it a little bit too. Like, you're supposed to enforce the law, and the law should be clear enough that it's clearly enforceable. And I think you alluded to the need for some changes, language, clarity. I'm curious, what do you see as being those problematic areas? One or two of them. What would you? I'm not going to hold you to it, and I don't expect you to be able to rattle it off. And I know you're speaking speculatively in the future. I could come up with some stuff, but where do you see the issues on the legal perspective? I'm not talking, critical of some of the other things about the the medical cannabis community, but just where do you see some things that could be cleaned up, and how would you rewrite the language?
I'd like to see some of the efforts that are being taken, much like the City of Saginaw issue, and the Ann Arbor decriminalization, that they did years ago, to look at these issues from the state level, because you're then encompassing all agencies within the state of Michigan that operate in a law enforcement capacity, to include the state police, the sheriffs across all 83 counties, and then the local police, who would find it, I think, a lot easier to adopt ordinances based on state law. So to clean up language, I think what we need to look at is the language in the medical marijuana. If there's going to be a proposal that mirrors Colorado's, which very well could happen, I anticipate that it will here in Michigan. To see that, I would like to make sure that language is extremely clear on what it is you can possess, how much, if there's a limit set, and what it means to transport, how to transport. Those things have to really be spelled out, and I think that's where someone from the law enforcement community really could give a little bit of guidance to say, well, maybe that's not so bad, or maybe it is bad and here's why, just to be another voice. But to look at the issues, it really should be looked at first and foremost, A, what you said earlier, is it as harmful as other Schedule I narcotics that the federal government says are harmful? If the people say no, then the people need to address it in such a way that there's a way for people to possess such a drug if they don't consider it to be that way. And that's where that language would have to be written, and it should be done, I think, it's at the state level. So I encourage, instead of a lot of local ordinances, and I understand why local ordinances are being looked at right now, but I'd rather see it looked at the state level so that it could encompass the entire state and all law enforcement agencies equally.
Jamie Lowe wants to ask you a couple questions. He's over here chomping at the bit. But I want to ask you one other thing. Anything specific come to mind about the existing law and the challenges your, officers or sheriffs have in terms of, a knock and talk, or they get a call, they execute a search warrant? Is it like the usable material issue? I know that I've litigated that, the enclosed locked facility. Is it, do you take issue with, who's getting certified? Do you think that not enough doctors are doing enough to know about how much cannabis a patient should use? Do any of those things jump to your fire from your synapses? None of those things bother you the way things are right now?
No, we're really not dealing with that issue. In my first term in office, there were a few issues that we had to deal with as an agency that I needed to talk to my staff about to make sure we were all on the same page. But now that I'm in my sixth year, I don't see any of those issues. We really don't. We see people that have they run a business outside of the law. It's not like they're within the confines of the medical marijuana community. They're doing something totally different with the drug, and that does raise our antenna, if you will, when people say, hey, we've got an issue with this. So we're not dealing with any issues that I know of within the medical marijuana community, people who are doing things the right way. We've had a lot of people call us and ask us what they should do or what they could do in particular certain circumstances, and we tell them exactly what it is that they need to do. And there may be occasional issues, but not very many.
Are we at a point where the community can trust a sheriff's department for an inspection? I'm sorry. All right, Jamie wants to go. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Jamie, roll.
Sure. Right, I have a couple questions. Medical marijuana. You mentioned that you're aware of medical marijuana patients in the community that you are the sheriff of. Has your opinion on medical marijuana and your understanding changed since the law came into effect till now? Have you noticed some of the medical marijuana patients benefiting from being able to choose to use medical marijuana as part of their health care? And
I have.
Sorry.
Yes.
Okay, good.
I would go ahead and finish your question. I'm sorry, I didn't know it was two parts. Sorry.
Yeah, and there are a couple of bills pending in the legislature right now that would clarify how a dispensary or provisioning center may operate, and to clarify how concentrates may be looked at and used within the Medical Marijuana Act as well. Do you believe that legislation would help to clarify some of these things? And these places, when you mention a business that's acting outside of the law, some of these places are a central location where the patients and caregivers carry out the spirit and intent of the law, and it makes it a lot easier for people to be able to learn about their options and to have the choices to help them better sooner. And it's been a very functional experience, and they are accepted in many communities and have worked out very well. Just wondering if what your thoughts are on that.
Well, to answer your first question, I've talked to patients who have benefited. They've told me they have benefited from it, and no doubt that they have. I don't doubt that they actually have benefited from that. As far as mentioning people operating in a business, I should have clarified that better. These are people that are not medical marijuana growers, or they're not caregivers, they're not patients. They're actually operating on a grand scale outside of that altogether. So those are usually the people I have issues with. Not so much what you're referring to. We haven't had any issues with that here in Saginaw County. I know in some other counties, in Oakland County and some others down south, there have been some issues, but I don't recall us having issues with that. I would like to see some of that legislation actually. Again, it all comes down to the language. How does it pertain to law enforcement? Is it the easiest to understand for everyone? Because it really needs to be. It really should just be very straightforward. You know, if it's okay to have and possess, let's really take a good hard look at that. What does that mean? And are we really okay with it, or aren't we? Because if we are, then we really should be. I mean, it's sometimes I feel. Even in Colorado, I see some of the laws, and they're saying, well, we think it's okay, but only this much. And I'm thinking, well, okay, if it's okay, then just make it okay. If it's not okay, then it's not okay. So I understand everything has to be baby steps, and I'm good with that, but the older I get, the more I think we should really be very, very clear about what it is we want, and that's where that legislation comes into play, and I'd really like to see some of that language be a lot more straightforward.
I understand that the job of the law enforcement is to enforce the law, and if it's clear, obviously it makes it easier. You know, I think Jamie was referring to, you know, I think that, you know, there's talk that there's 100 or more, maybe more dispensaries or provisioning centers that exist within the state of Michigan, despite what I think many would say, you know, that the law doesn't allow for transferring to more than, you know, one of your 5 patients and be protected against arrest, albeit it's defendable behavior. People, there's a tremendous disparity in terms of how those facilities are looked at in various communities. I think it's even fair to say that, you know, we know what the communities are that are more tolerant, you know, themselves, like locally, even the sheriff's departments. Yeah. And, you know, a lot of my practice is in Oakland County. I can't tell you the number of cases where sheriffs, the narcotics teams have taken, you know, fake patient cards and gone into these locations and presented themselves as patients as the violation of, you know, the protections, and therefore committing a violation of the public health code. Is this where we want? I mean, I understand it. You know, if the community is against it, and you know, this is they've led the charge, I think, for many of the communities. But do you approve of that? I mean, where we are right now, or do you think that that's wasted time and energy in fighting that stuff out? I mean, you know what I'm talking about? Assuming that people are checking cards, making certain that, you know, they are patients. And I'm talking about even to a 6th patient or a 7th patient, not their own 5. Does that inherently bother you, even though you know you can arrest that person? Is that something that's really going to irk you, as long as you know that it's patient activity with cards?
No, you know, what it boils down to is no, it wouldn't. I just about say that would not irk me. I think we need to really, and I won't comment on another sheriff. I hate to Monday morning quarterback somebody else. This is a bad thing for me to do. I know I could probably be Monday morning quarterback to death, and rightfully so sometimes. But it would not irk me to see us not take a look at that. You know, we do things. We look at alcohol, and I like to use these comparisons. There are people who say, you know, Sheriff, we have laws in the books for alcohol, but one of the things that we really focus on with alcohol isn't the adult usage or how much. Are you driving a car impaired to hurt somebody else, or are minors buying it? Those are the things we're focused on, and that's kind of what I'd like to see us look at with marijuana as it moves forward. You know, you look at Colorado, obviously adults can purchase, possess. It's what happens when they sell to a minor or something. That would hurt me a little bit more. We have to be a little comes to adult, and they're within the provisions, now that doesn't set me on tilt at all to think about that.
Do you think we need to reform the way that we view alcohol? I mean, an advocate once, like a show a couple of weeks ago was talking about we need marijuana reform, but we also need to advocate for stricter restrictions on alcohol. That's the danger, the way it's glamorized on television and commercials, and you're wiring children's brains that are watching a sporting event with the idea that they can only have a good time by drinking alcohol, and the glamorization. I mean, I know that prohibition doesn't work. I'm not going to advocate that it does, but do you think there's some room for reform in that direction? Do you think we've gotten too wild with alcohol?
Well, sometimes I wonder if the alcohol industry isn't taking a look at Colorado and Washington and looking over their shoulder a little bit. I'm not, again, I'll say I don't like a nanny state. I didn't like it when Bloomberg in New York said I couldn't buy a 20-ounce pop or soda, because it's the Northeast, I should say. Right. I'm more, I guess, I apologize to any libertarians that would hear me say this, but I do feel more libertarian-leaning alcohol or any of that. It's it's a choice that you want to make, but when you harm others or you put someone else in harm's way, that's when I have a problem with it. So, alcohol, if I don't want my kids to see it on television, I'll flip the channel or they'll just watch something. So I really don't think, I don't want to go down that road either with trying to regulate it anymore. We'll just, let's just be accountable for our actions.
Very good. I like that. Let me ask you this. We were talking about this a little bit when we were waiting for you to come on the, that there was a bill that was just running through one of the committees trying to utilize roadside testing, the saliva test, and I don't think that it. I think they ended up adopting it in the bill as a pilot program. And there's new legislation this last year in the Motor Vehicle Code about really like a open-ended, broad, any substance that affects an individual's ability to drive, and obviously it's written if someone's on prescription drugs or would include the combination thereof of alcohol and or prescription drugs or things to that effect, without any per se limits or without any indicia of a number like 0.08 of alcohol or what was 0.10. And I turn the question now to cannabis or marijuana or patients. The law currently in Michigan is that any person who's got active THC in their bloodstream is, per se illegal. A patient, you have to prove impairment beyond just having it in their bloodstream. And Colorado just adopted a per se 5 nanogram limit, and Washington State as well when they legalized possession and the growing of plants. Do you think that that's a fair way to? I mean, I know you're going to want some level, I'm assuming, but are those numbers that speak impairment to you, and do you think that there's even a fair way, if any, to judge this, or is there not enough information available?
I haven't gotten enough information. I don't even know if Colorado and Washington State have enough. I don't want to second guess them, but it's not. I don't think enough research has been done. Obviously, you don't want people to get behind the wheel of a car when they're under the influence of something that could impair their driving. I mean, really, that's none of us want that, I would think. Anybody that has kids or that's got young people out there driving, the last thing you want is for someone to be tired at the wheel. Or we had a guy that was chewing on some fentanyl patches. He was hooked on fentanyl, and he ended up crashing into a car with 3 people in it, killing 2 ladies. You're going to see it, and we see it, unfortunately, every day. And it's not, I don't see marijuana being a key component here. And I'm not sure what the answer to that is. I wish I did. I wish someone did that could say, well, there's this much in your system, and that's just way too much. And this is one way we can find out if you've got it in there. And I don't know if there's any way that we'll ever be able to do it. I don't see that being done today. So I don't really know what the answer is. All I know is that people do want to feel safe when they're out there driving. And it's tough enough as it is, for goodness sakes. We've got texting to deal with. We've got all kinds of other things. And as far as So, we've got a lot of things going on out there that can harm us, and we're just trying to protect people, get them going where they're safe from point A to point B. That's really what I want, and what they're doing at point A, I really don't mind or care. Just between point A and point B, make sure you get there safe.
Let me ask you this: since the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act has been in effect, and I'm presuming that the Sheriff's Department does a tremendous amount of traffic enforcement, and you probably have a alcohol enforcement team, probably, right? I mean, there's sheriffs that are trained in level 2 and 3 and 4 breathalyzer or whatever. I mean, but the Sheriff's Department, I'm assuming, does a lot of alcohol and driving traffic enforcement.
Well, we have 2 traffic officers. They're 416, Public Act 416 funded. And so, but their main focus is not alcohol. It is not citations for seatbelts. It is to enforce all of the traffic laws on roads that are not M roads or interstates, so the back roads, if you will. Okay. Making sure that people are following the speed limit, making sure that everybody's getting from point A to point B safely. That's what we want. Don't text and drive. Don't do all these things that could harm other people. Things that you would think are common sense, but we don't have a lot of that in society. That's why, unfortunately, we exist, I think.
Right.
People who don't have common sense. If we had common sense, I'd be out of a job. I'd probably be happy.
Right.
Everybody'd be happy if I was out of a job, I think, or some people anyways. But really that's what it boils down to, the decisions that people make when it could harm someone else. And so, no, I don't have an alcohol enforcement team. I don't have detectives that participate in Bayonet, which is the local drug team. So we go out, we work with the people of Saginaw County. We respond to calls 911. We do try to be proactive. We get into the schools. We talk to the kids about whatever, just to make relationships and build relationships. But we don't have an active alcohol enforcement team, to answer your question.
I was getting towards something else, which was whether from your own your officers' interactions in their police work, or the word on the street amongst your peers. Has there been an increase in driving offenses involving marijuana or accidents involving marijuana alone? I'm not talking marijuana and alcohol or marijuana and pills, or marijuana and ecstasy. I'm talking. I mean, is it a concern? Is it a public safety concern that you're aware of? That's being spoken about in amongst the law enforcement community, specifically marijuana and driving.
No, it's not. That's not something that I've heard other chiefs talk about. They may. I don't hear it. It's not a concern with our agency. It's not like we're out there saying, "Oh my God, we had 20 people arrested for driving under the influence of marijuana." That's not the case. Our biggest concern right now, again, is drinking and driving. That is still a lot that goes on, and we do have some enforcement of that on certain times of the year. We do put out extra patrols. But really that's been the main focus is the alcohol. We're concerned about prescription usage, even people that get prescribed pills, that disregard the warning label, if you will, that says don't operate a motor vehicle if you're under the influence of this prescribed medication, and some people just disregard that, get behind the wheel anyways. Right. And that's not good. So we see, and I've seen more of that, actually. If I've seen anything on an uprise, it's been more impaired driving, people who actually have been prescribed the medication but disregard the instructions. So I've seen actually more of an increase in that than with anything else.
All right, let me ask you some simple yes or no questions, or purported simple yes or no questions. The Michigan Medical Marijuana Act has been in effect since 2008, approximately 6 years. Do you see your job as a law enforcement sheriff becoming easier, more difficult, or remaining the same since the law's been in effect?
I'd have to say it's remained the same. In some ways it's been a little easier, and in some ways it's been a little bit more difficult, only because we want to try and get the message out that this is the law. And so when we encourage people to call us, it hasn't necessarily made it more difficult. It's just we've responded to it, which I think is great. So I don't want to make it seem like it's difficult. It has taken up a little bit more time, but in a great way. So I would have to say it hasn't changed as far as the difficultness, but it has consumed a little bit more time in just getting over that hump to help people understand it. And then we've seen a tapering off effect, which is good.
Do you think that Michigan medical marijuana in general is good for Michigan?
Yes.
Do you like the direction that it's going right now? Do you see it as in 2 to 4 years evolving in a positive direction, or do you see it remaining in a in what someone describes as gray areas and remaining ambiguity?
Well, that really depends on the people. If the people of Michigan actually raise their voices to be heard, then I think we could actually see some changes either in the current language that would make it better for all, or in a totally different type of proposal that might be a lot easier to understand. So I think that it could be a lot better. I'm an optimistic person by nature, but it really depends on what the people, if the people of the state of Michigan remember exactly what it is we do when we go to the polls every year, 2 years or every 4 years, depending on the elected office, and we send people that we call representatives. They do represent us. I would hope that we're asking them the right questions so that we can get the type of legislation that we want to be governed by. So yes, I think it could be better in the future, but it really depends on whether we, the people, want to make it better.
I'm assuming that the sheriff's office is a 6-year term. Is that what it is?
4-year term.
4-year, okay. So, and I don't know where you are in your, but do you see your
middle of my second?
Middle of your second, okay. So you would be in office then in 2016 or running again in 2016, which is when it has been threatened that there will be a statewide initiative. I guess my question is, do you think as a sheriff in the political office that you will hold and continue to hold, that you will see a marijuana legalized in the state of Michigan?
I do.
Do you think that that's the right step, and do you approve that as a direction for the state of Michigan?
Well, I don't know if it's the right step or not. Again, if the people of the state of Michigan want to go that route, I don't know necessarily that it would be right or wrong. It's just what the people want, and I totally respect what the people want since I work for the people. So I don't like getting into the right and wrong aspect of it because it's right for some and wrong for others, but really, if it's good for the majority of the people, or if people of the state of Michigan are tolerant of that, then I see that happening eventually. I just don't know exactly when. But course of history, I think that we're moving in that direction. And just from a realistic standpoint, yeah, I think we're headed that way.
Do you agree with the position that if there's less time and resources needed to do what is unequivocally there may be some debate about this, but a victimless crime of a possession of marijuana or delivery of marijuana, if the time and resources of a law enforcement community are not spent in that activity, the time off the road, the processing that puts more time into the more serious and challenging types of investigations associated with public safety?
Absolutely. When you put it in that perspective, yes. I mean, obviously we want to deal. We've got a very serious crime problem in the city of Saginaw. We've got a very serious issue here at Saginaw County when you talk about violent crime, looking at the FBI statistics. So we do have a lot of work to do, we as a law enforcement community, not just the sheriff's office, the city, the township, and the state. We have a lot of work to do here, and our focus really should be on crimes against persons. That's the first and foremost the thing that we really need to focus on. And the second thing is crimes against property. Obviously, it's our responsibility to protect people and to protect people's things. So when you look down at possession of marijuana, yeah, it's way down low on the priority level because we really need to protect people and their things.
You agree, though, that it probably makes up 40% of most court dockets. I mean, I think if you walked into the circuit court, if it wasn't for marijuana charges, it may not be a lot of, or like violation of probations for testing positive. I mean, it makes up a huge,
it does.
And do you think one of the inherent, and I'm just a couple last question. Do you think that the financial side of this, because listen, the reality is there's politics. I mean, you said it before, like, I'm sure if you had your way and didn't have to worry about making certain people happy, and which is impossible, it might be a different world in Saginaw. But there are politics, and the way things are divided up. There's revenue, there's forfeiture proceeds from some of these violations, which is incentive to not reform, and there's large revenue stream from court costs and testing facilities. I know like a couple of the testing facilities I know one of the families that owns it, it's a former judge, and there's like 4 or 5 families that business is feeding very well. And I get, I'm just saying, just strictly marijuana. Do you think that quantity of money that is being driven from the prohibitions is too much to remove from the way things are being done, or do you think there's a way to functionally change those resources into different types of crime fighting and different types of public safety solutions?
Well, that's a great question, and I have utilized the forfeiture laws. I think everyone, I'm on record as having done that, and there are times that I do. However, looking at that, can we get by without it? Yes. Should we be getting by without it? Yes. We should. We should never rely on that, nor should we look at it as a source of funding. The one thing that people in the community look at and have talked to me about when it comes to that forfeiture, and we can talk about drugs or theft or whatever, it could be whatever kind of crime you're envisioning. It doesn't always revolve around drugs, but drugs obviously gets the most attention, and it's probably the most lucrative for a lot of agencies. So when you look at that, some people look at it in the respect that, well, because it is a prohibition type of a stance, there are people who are making a great deal of money, but they're not contributing back to society. They're not paying the things that, the sewer, the lights, the water, et cetera, in their community for their local fire department, et cetera. And so I think that's one of the where the push came for forfeiture, and talking to certain members of the community who voted for certain members of the legislature in Lansing. So again, I talked to a lot of people. There are some people vehemently opposed to any type of forfeiture for government. And like I've said to everyone that I come in contact with, that we as government officials must be really careful with what we do with the resources that we have. And we can follow laws. Obviously, we have to follow laws as law enforcement officers, but those laws must be made very judiciously, or should be made very judiciously, with the people in mind at the state and federal level. So it's a dicey situation. Some agencies, they rely on it for manpower, for staffing. I do not rely on it for any type of staffing or wages or anything like that. Some do, and I know some agencies that do that. So it's something that we have to really take a look at as society. What is it that we really want? What are we trying to accomplish? And it goes back to the very first question. Should we have prohibition or shouldn't we? And I'm sure they were dealing with this question with the Al Capones of the world way back when, almost 100 years ago. So again, we're not reinventing the wheel with this. We just need to look back at history to find out how things were dealt with so that we don't repeat history in a bad way. I'd like to repeat some of the good things, not the bad things. So there's a lot of things we need to take a look at.
And I appreciate your comments on that. And I mean, just hearing your overall political philosophy, I mean, I don't think you would disagree that one of the reasons why this country was founded was because we objected to the King of England coming into our homes and taking our property and demanding that they can take it. We've got to pay for it. In terms of forfeiture, and we had another caller on earlier that was discussing in that context. We've come a long way since then, and the evolution of the laws. In a lot of ways, it really questions the whole purpose of why we have a constitution in some ways. But do you think that the government's become too involved with that aspect? And I'm not talking about you and the Saginaw, but do you think, as you discussed it, it is a revenue source, and its availability as a vehicle to do this is, there's a lot of discretion, so to speak. I mean, to a certain degree, in what they want to take, and if they find criminal activity going on.
Yeah, there is definitely a lot of discretion when it comes to that, and I've said it before. We have utilized forfeiture. Obviously, someone asked me one time. They said, "Well, you had a drug dealer that was a cocaine dealer, and he had $60,000. Why did you only take, $15,000 and leave him with the other money?" And I said, "Well, because that's the only money we could prove that he had earned illegally." So there's got a level of integrity, even if you don't like forfeiture. You must respect, or whether you do or you don't, you have to respect what it is you're trying to accomplish. Some agencies may say, we're just going to take it all, and then so-and-so can fight to get it back. That's not the right thing to do, in my opinion. If, under the law, someone had X amount, and you could prove that, again, that we're talking about whether it's appropriate or not, and that's debatable by a lot of people, but I do believe that discretion can come into play, and that's a little scary. Yeah, I mean, I look at the federal government and even local agencies, and, I've had to have a lot of talks with my agency and what direction we want to go, and I've got a large agency, 135 full-time, another 85 reserve, and it's, kind of like turning a ship around in the channel. It doesn't happen overnight, and it won't happen in society overnight unless people stand up and they say exactly what it is they want to say, what it is that we want done. And we have to have a voice, and we have to be heard. So, again, I'm really a big advocate of legislation and getting the right people to represent us in Lansing and in Washington, because so frequently people are just satisfied with whoever puts their name on the ballot, and they really don't think it makes that much of a difference. But I disagree. It really makes a lot of difference. And so I do operate within the law, but that discretion when it comes to forfeitures is something that really needs to be looked at.
All right, let me ask you, I'm wrapping it up. I keep saying it's the last question, but I'm fascinated by your thoughts on this. Do you advise, and you don't even have to make this as a political statement as an elected official, I'm more curious, just from what you know in law enforcement, do you advise loved ones and family members to possess weapons or own weapons, or, irresponsibly, of course, in terms of being protected and, if available, to be able to carry? Are you a proponent of that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, if you want to carry a firearm and you want to do it legally, I always tell people, that's fine. Do it, follow the law, but practice with it. Because it's like anything. It's a deadly weapon. If you don't shoot it, you're going to get rusty. And trust me, if you ever have to use it, you want to hit what you're shooting at. Do not think that you're just going to pull it out. You're going to be under an inordinate amount of stress. Make sure you practice with it. That's all I recommend to people. If you're going to carry a firearm, either concealed or open carry, it's your right to do so. But just be responsible with it and understand that under stress and pressure, you'll rely on your training. And if you have no training, God knows what will happen. So I do advocate that people who want to take that great responsibility on, by all means, it's your right to do so. Just do it responsibly.
I guess I was asking more like, and I know that's a quality, and I don't mean this, critically, but it's a great answer politically. But I'm just wondering, from what you know about law enforcement, what you know about the world out there that you are enforcing for public safety, to your loved ones, I don't know, cousins, relatives, if they ever asked you, Uncle William, do you think we should have a gun in our home, and should I be, or do you, is that something like, you think people should be? Now, of course, we're talking about a responsible individual. Do you think that people should, for their own protection, in today's world, have, be trained and ready to use a weapon?
No, I don't encourage people to do it because it is such a great responsibility. I don't own a lot of guns. I own one gun. That's it. I'm the sheriff, but I own one gun. It's a .38 revolver, 5-shot. That's my gun. I'm not someone who tells my family they should. There are some who ask me, and they like to hunt. They want to protect themselves, and I encourage them to go to the range. And of course, if you want to carry. But I don't encourage people to go out and stockpile or carry or keep them in their homes unless they really feel that need. I personally am not one who does, and so.
I say, would you encourage other family members or people that you care about or you've come across or spoken to get involved in law enforcement? I mean, do you think it's still a career that is safe? And that's probably a loaded question, but do you think that's one that people can enjoy and it's a quality work experience and life experience in today's world?
It's a good question. I don't have any family members that I've encouraged to go and become law enforcement officers. I do give talks to people who think they want to be police officers because a lot of times in high school they watch television and they see all these cop shows and they want to be just like the television cops, and it's no different than when I was growing up with Jack Lord and Y50 and, I could go on and on the streets of San Francisco and all these police shows. Look 'em, Dan, yeah. And personally, I was more inclined to follow guys like Jim Rockford, just everyday guys. But I always tell these kids, if you're really interested in law enforcement, you must really like to write. Do you like to write reports? And not a single one says they do. And I said, well, I don't know if you should get into this field because it's become a writer's field. You really have to write, document. You spend a lot of time doing that. So it is a field that I think is necessary. I think people really should make it a calling. I don't think people should get into it for the wrong reasons because then you can run into issues. And I think we've had issues in society with people who have gotten into law enforcement, have gone unchecked, and have violated the trust of the public. And once you do that, I've talked to my deputies on many occasions. I tell them, if you ever write a ticket to someone, it's a simple thing like a ticket, a traffic ticket for speeding, you'd better make sure that you're 100% sure that they are the ones who committed that infraction. If you're not 100% sure, don't write that ticket because you will destroy the very fabric of trust that exists between the people and their police. So you have to be really careful with that, and we really have to follow that all the way through. And it's gotten very difficult to do that with the amount of lawyers that have gotten involved with the law. I mean, we are, again, a society run by lawyers and run by regulations. We are a highly regulated society, and makes it very difficult to do the job because there really isn't a lot of discretion. There used to be, which would make it a lot easier. I think all of us growing up in the 70s as children, in the 80s as high school kids like me, would run into police officers that might have had a great deal of discretion that today's police officers do not. And that could be a problem sometimes.
Well, I probably could come with a lot more questions, but I think we should call it there. I really, I could go on, and I really enjoyed talking to you. Any places where any of the listeners can find your band playing? I saw that one clip of you singing that song. That is courage. Yeah. That is courage to. I mean, talk about policing. Getting up in front of people. That's courage. But I'm sure you guys rock it.
Yeah, no, we're not playing anywhere in particular. I'm just an average guy. I'm just a guy that grew up in the city of Saginaw. I happen to be the sheriff. I take it very seriously. I want to serve the people. I won't always be sheriff. I don't know that I'll even run in 2016. I have to look at it and see if the people really want me to. I'll never run if people don't want me to. I tell them, you'll never have to throw me out of office. Just tell me ahead of time, and I'll go on my way. So hopefully I'll find my calling, if it's not to be the sheriff in 2016, to do whatever. But I do enjoy doing it. If the people want me to stay and I'm in a position with my family where that's a good option, then I will run again, but it's a long way away. So in the meantime, I'll keep playing my music and just trying to educate myself and try and get people involved in politics, because that's really, really the key. If I could just say one other thing real quick about Plato, the Greek philosopher, who said, if you do not get involved in politics, you stand a great chance of being governed by your inferiors. I tell that to college kids all the time. I say, think about that for a minute and then tell me if you don't want to get involved. I bet you do.
Awesome. Way to end. I really enjoyed talking to you, and
Thank you.
very, very great to kind of hear what I would describe as a reasonable and rational voice from, to what our community would perceive as a not always that way. So I really appreciate you opening up and discussing all those issues with us, and have a great night.
I'm trying. Thank you. I do try. I'm really trying to be a good sheriff to everybody, and I appreciate your time to let me be on here. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Have a great night.
Sure appreciate you coming on. Thanks.
All right.